Beloveds, I greet you today with the traditional Easter greeting. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Please join me in this Easter prayer. We have walked in the wilderness, never abandoned, never alone. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. We have followed the steps of Jesus with disciples and crowds on dusty roads. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. We have sat at table for the Passover meal and watched the betrayal. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. We have witnessed the trial, the crucifixion, the day of waiting. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. And now the tomb is empty. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Death has been conquered by love, and we are never abandoned, never alone. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen. Hear these words from John 20, verses 1 and 2. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." This is the word of life. Thanks be to God. What a life-changing morning for Mary Magdalene and the other disciples. Arriving at the tomb to prepare Jesus' body, she found the tomb open and Jesus' body missing. "I have seen the Lord," she tells the other disciples. Christ, though crucified, was alive and present with grieving disciples. The risen Christ is our companion today in these times of wilderness. Christ is present with people in jails and prisons. Christ is present with the sick, the dying, and those who mourn. Christ is present with young and old who march in the streets, calling for justice for Black and brown lives. Christ is present with migrants all over the world who are fleeing violence and poverty. Christ is present as we await the end of a pandemic. Christ stands with us as we face the challenges of growing old, as we struggle with the death of a loved one, as we stand face to face with injustice and evil. Christ calls our name, and we recognize his presence with us. Holy One, you are present with us in our sorrow and despair, our joy and our hope. May we recognize you and call you friend. And all of God's people said, Amen. We gather today with gratitude for the gift of Christ's life and resurrection. Let us join together in prayer. For wisdom to teach and guide us. For the leaders of the nations and all in authority. For justice, peace, and freedom among all peoples of the earth. For a just and merciful end to the pandemics of COVID-19, systemic racism, and domestic abuse around the world. For the equitable distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. For those suffering physically, emotionally, spiritually, and economically. For those feeling afraid, lost, and alone. For those who are mourning the death of loved ones, the death of dreams, the death of hope. We join our voices with all the saints and angels of God, and we offer ourselves and one another to the living God through Christ. Amen. Beloveds, Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, you are beloved, and you are not alone. Go in peace. Amen.